You are going to want to start by kneading your clay, using the heels of your hands to push the clay into a rocking spiral motion to force out the air pockets. You can do this for 30 to 60 seconds. I am then going to start to flatten my clay. I'm using the class rolling pin. Please refer to the demonstration video on how to use your PVC pipe and your dowel rods if you are working from home and you do not have a rolling pin. So I keep flipping the clay back and forth. And then once I have the clay 1/4 of an inch thickness, maybe a little bit thinner, I'm just going to take my wooden rib, the flat edge, and I'm going to smooth that out. This is especially important if you are not using the slab roller in the classroom. You are using your PVC pipe and you are using the dowel rods. You need to take your wooden rib and compress. Be careful that you do not get fingerprints into your slab. So again, flat side, this compresses the clay the same way a slab roller would. If you're at home, you do not have access to a slab roller. This is your mold. You have a front and a back side. The back side is the larger, so that is the one you're going to trace. So very lightly trace, and it could be a circular plate. It could be whatever mold you're using from home. This is just the one I'm using. I want my plate to be bigger than the mold. I am going with 1/2 inch. So all the way around, I am measuring 1/2 inch out from that original tracing. You could go a full inch, you could go 1/4 of an inch. It's your decision, but you want your plate to be larger than the mold. So you can see that I'm using the ruler and I'm making a few marks on each side just to make sure my lines stay straight. 1/2 inch out. And then I can slightly or lightly trace using my ruler to keep my lines straight so that I have a bigger clay plate than the mold. So once I've lightly drawn it in, everything looks good. I can actually hold the ruler against my line and I can cut through with my pin tool. So I'm slicing all the way through the clay. This video does look a little bit skewed, but it's just the angle of my camera. This is a perfect square. So now I'm going to flip the mold over so the smaller end is facing the clay. And I'm going to try and get it as even as possible by visually looking at it, making sure the spacing's even. I'm going to very gently pick it up, flip it over, and start to gently press my clay to fit the mold. You can do this with whatever mold you've chosen to use. That includes the paper plates that I gave you when you came to pick up your supplies. You can also use a plate from your dinner set at your house if parents have approved that. If you're in class with me and not in a remote setting, you'll get to use the wooden molds that I've used. I am now measuring the bottom of my plate, and I'm figuring out the length of that because I'm figuring out a foot. You have to put a foot on both of your plates. You're making 2 for this project. So I'm kind of figuring out how big my foot wants to be. Your foot should be in the same shape as your plate. So I'm going with 3 inches. And I'm making a square foot. If you have a round plate, you can figure out the circumference and give yourself, roll a really long coil and do a round foot. If you have a rectangular plate, it should be a rectangular foot. So I've lightly drawn that in. You can look at it, make sure it's even. And then I'm going to take some of that slab that I rolled, that I cut my plate out of. I'm scoring. So remember, to attach 2 pieces of clay, you have to score, which roughs up the surface. You have to score both the plate and the foot. So I'm going in and I'm scoring deep, close marks. Kind of smoothing out my slab a little bit because I was moving it around a lot, so it got a little messy. You have to decide how big you want your feet to be. You might want a really tall foot, so you go with 1 inch. You might want a medium-sized foot, so you go with 1/2 inch. I'm looking at my ruler and I'm finding every 1/4 of an inch, and I'm marking enough that I can get 4 feet or 4 pieces to make 1 foot. I'm going to draw up 3 inches because remember I decided that each side would be 3 inches tall or long. Using my little 1/4 of an inch marks as a guide. I'm going up 3 inches. Everything looks good. Whoops. I can cut through. I'm going to cut off the left and the right side because they are messy and they're not a part of my group of 4. So then I can very carefully slice each one of these, and now I have 4 pieces to make a square foot for my plate. So if you look, these line up pretty good. But if you remember from Ceramics 1, we need our 45-degree angles to create nice, sharp, crisp corners. So that's what I'm going to do on every one of these. I'm going to cut a 45 into each edge. And you can see how nicely that fits together. But I've got to do it to every side. Kind of push it together, see what it looks like. Gather all your clay scraps. If they're still wet, put them back in your bag. We need to save, save, save our clay. You're going to score the bottom of each side of your foot close together. Deeper marks. Think about like Velcro. A little bit of slip. Your watery clay mixture. You don't need a lot of it, just kind of smooth some on there. Place your foot. Push your corners together and start to kind of line things up and add some pressure to really get those to stick. You can see I'm not really adding any water yet to smooth. The clay is still really soft, so I don't want to add a lot of water, just a little bit on the modeling knife. And you're going to start to smooth down the foot to the piece. So you can see where I'm using that to actually grab some of the clay from the foot and smush it down into the plate and then run my finger over it. That's helping to lock the foot in place. Again, So I can push that clay down so it blends into the plate. Smooth it out with my finger. I won't do a ton of smoothing when I'm first building because the clay is too soft. So I'll start with just making sure my adhesions are really good and doing like a quick smooth. But as the clay starts to stiffen up and become leather hard, it's a lot easier to clean it up. I'm also going to go in on the inside and do the same exact thing I did on the outside. I'm just grabbing some of that clay from the foot and smushing it down into the actual plate itself. Smoothing my edges a little bit. Now this plate is really soft. If I flipped this over and tried to have it stand on the foot I just made, I would squash the foot. So I do not want to do that. Get your wooden board, set your plate on top of it, upside down, and you can wrap it with plastic. So I'm taking the plastic, I'm folding it over and kind of tucking it underneath the plate. I am not wrapping the wear board. You can do 2 bags. Or, if you want your foot to stiffen up, leave it sitting out for a couple of hours. Just don't forget about it, okay?